How are you tonight? I hope your day has been gentle so far. Tonight we will drift into the world of the Victorian age, a time when ordinary workers faced the challenges of the Industrial Revolution and learned how to survive in a rapidly changing world. But before we begin this quiet journey into the past, let me ask, from which country are you listening, and what time is it right now where you are? It feels soothing to imagine people in many places connected by this moment of stillness as we share history together. If you enjoy these calm stories, you may gently like this video, leave a soft comment, subscribe, and activate the bell so you can join again whenever the next quiet tale is told. The Industrial Revolution was not loud in every place all at once. For many people, it arrived quietly, with small signs that daily life would not remain the same. Imagine a quiet village at the start of the 19th century. Houses built of wood and brick, fields surrounding the edges, and people living as they had for generations. But soon, new factories appeared, with tall chimneys that sent smoke into the sky, and bells that marked time more strictly than the natural rhythm of sunrise and sunset. It was as if life itself was being pulled into a new direction. For the ordinary worker, the world was transforming before their eyes. Horses and carts gave way to rumbling trains, and hand tools were replaced by machines that never seemed to rest. At first, these changes brought uncertainty. How would people earn a living? How would they find their place in a society that moved faster and louder each year? Yet, despite the challenges, people adapted step by step, because survival meant learning to flow with this new rhythm. Each day became a quiet lesson in resilience. Factories were unlike anything people had known before. Inside, long rows of machines clattered without pause, the sound echoing through every wall. Workers learned to keep their bodies in sync with this endless movement. They followed the motion of wheels, pulleys, and hammers, timing each task carefully to avoid danger. For hours that stretched from dawn to nightfall, survival depended not only on strength, but on endurance and routine. In this way, the factory itself became both a workplace and a test of patience. The air in industrial towns felt different, filled with smoke, dust, and the faint taste of iron on the tongue. Streets grew crowded with carts, workers, and children, all moving in step with the rhythm of factories. Narrow alleys echoed with footsteps, the sound of clogs on cobblestones, and distant whistles signaling the start or end of shifts. It was a world of noise and motion, but also of repetition. And in repetition, workers found a strange kind of order, something steady to hold onto in uncertain times. But survival was never only about work. It was also about what happened once the factory doors closed. Families gathered in small, crowded homes, where a single fireplace warmed everyone in the evening. Meals were simple, but shared, and that togetherness softened the weight of long days. In these moments, people remembered that life was more than machines and smoke. It was also about holding on to each other and finding comfort in familiar routines that stretched back across generations. The Industrial Revolution did not erase the old ways entirely. Even as factories grew, traditions remained. Families still visited local markets, neighbors still shared small favors, and communities formed around simple acts of kindness. In this balance between old and new, survival became possible. People could step into the future without entirely losing the past. And it was often the quiet persistence of these traditions that gave strength to endure each new challenge. Still, it was not easy. For many workers, each day felt like a careful balance between exhaustion and determination. The body grew weary, but the mind held steady with hope that tomorrow might bring something a little easier, a little brighter. And though life was filled with difficulty, survival itself was a form of victory. To rise each morning, to face the factory, and to return home again was proof of resilience. A reminder that even in the hardest times, people found ways to carry on. Think of it as a story of patience. A generation that endured great changes, not with loud voices, but with quiet strength. They did not choose the world of machines and smoke, but they lived within it and adapted in ways that shaped history. Their survival was not dramatic, but steady, like a heartbeat keeping rhythm with the passage of time. And in that steadiness, we can find a kind of peace, even now, when listening to their story in the quiet of night. So, as we linger in this first glimpse of Victorian life, let us move gently. Imagine the air thick with the scent of coal, the streets narrow and filled with workers returning home, the sky dimmed by smoke but glowing faintly with evening lamps. The world was shifting, but inside each small house, people still found warmth, routine, and comfort in one another. It is here, in the balance between hardship and endurance, that we see the true beginning of survival during the Industrial Revolution. And slowly, calmly, we drift deeper into their world. When nights settled over industrial towns, the factories slowly grew quiet. The sound of hissing steam faded, and workers returned to their homes, worn but thankful for a place to rest. Narrow streets, once filled with clattering footsteps, calmed under the glow of dim lamps. In these hours, life felt softer, the chaos of the day replaced with the stillness of night. It was a reminder that even in a world of endless change, moments of peace still existed, waiting at the end of each long day. Inside those homes, evenings followed familiar routines. A simple meal might be shared, with bread, potatoes, or porridge filling the table. The fire in the hearth gave both warmth and light, a gift allowed by the will of the Almighty through wood and coal. Families gathered close, telling stories, repairing clothes, or simply sitting together in silence. Though resources were few, these small moments were powerful, carrying the weight of comfort and belonging. Children often played in the corners, their laughter soft but precious. Even after long hours of work, the joy of the young created hope for the future. Parents found strength in those small voices, reminding them that tomorrow was worth enduring. It was this sense of continuity, of generations carrying each other forward, that made survival possible in such demanding times. The future was uncertain, but together, families built a kind of resilience, stronger than iron. Beyond the home, the streets themselves had a rhythm. Vendors closed their stalls, neighbors exchanged quiet words, and the hum of the city softened. It was in these simple exchanges, borrowing a tool, sharing a loaf of bread, offering to watch a child, that communities survived. Support was never grand, but it was steady, and it gave working people a safety net, fragile yet essential, woven from human connection. These bonds formed the invisible strength of the industrial city, and so, survival was never just about labor or wages. It was about patience, shared responsibility, and the quiet decision each day to continue moving forward. The Industrial Revolution demanded much from its workers, but they found ways to answer, not through wealth or power, but through persistence and adaptation. Each sunrise brought new challenges, yet each night they returned home, proving once more that survival itself was an act of endurance. Over time, people grew accustomed to this new way of living. The sight of smoke-filled skies no longer startled them. The sound of factory bells became as natural as birdsong had once been. Change, no matter how difficult, became the new normal. And in this acceptance, workers discovered a hidden strength, the ability to bend without breaking, and to adjust without losing who they were. Still, memories of the old ways lingered. Farmers who had once tilled soil remembered the quiet of open fields. Craftsmen recalled the satisfaction of slow, careful work with their hands. These memories lived alongside the present, shaping how people understood their lives. The Industrial Revolution was not only about new machines, it was also about holding onto identity in a rapidly shifting world. In that balance, survival carried meaning. Workers were not simply swept away by history, but became part of it, shaping the age with their quiet strength. Their lives may have seemed ordinary, but together they built the foundations of modern society. The endurance of these men, women, and children is still remembered, not for grandeur, but for persistence. And persistence, after all, is what survival often requires. Tonight, as we reflect on this story, let us pause to imagine those quiet evenings. Smoke drifting into the night sky, footsteps fading into silence, and families resting after long hours of labor. The world outside was changing faster than ever before, but within those homes, people held on to the constants of life: warmth, food, family, and community. These constants made survival possible, even in the harshest conditions. And they remain lessons for us, centuries later. As we close this first segment, think gently about the people of that time, their struggles, their resilience, and their patience in the face of change. How do you picture their lives? Do you imagine the sound of machines, or the glow of lamplight in the evening? If you wish, you may share your thoughts in the comments, perhaps describing how this story made you feel tonight. In that way, the quiet endurance of Victorian workers continues to echo softly into our own time. Factories were unlike anything the world had seen before. Imagine entering through heavy wooden doors into a hall filled with endless rows of machinery. Wheels turned, belts spun, and metal parts clattered in constant rhythm. The sound was overwhelming, echoing against brick walls, creating a chorus of noise that never truly stopped. For the workers, this was daily life. To survive in this environment, they learned to move carefully, keeping pace with the machines while guarding their own safety. Work began early in the morning. Before the sun had fully risen, the factory bell rang out, summoning men, women, and children alike. The streets filled with footsteps, a steady stream of people making their way to the factory gates. Once inside, hours stretched endlessly, broken only by short breaks if any were given. The clock seemed to move slowly, each tick marking not just time, but the effort of muscles and the patience of the mind. The machines themselves were demanding. Spinning frames, power looms, and steam engines worked at a speed far greater than human hands. To keep up, workers developed routines, repeating the same motion hundreds of times in a single day. A missed step or moment of distraction could mean injury, as machines showed no mercy. Survival required focus, endurance, and a kind of rhythm that allowed the body to move almost automatically. The air inside was often thick with dust and smoke. Cotton fibers floated in textile factories, while metal filings and soot lingered in foundries. Breathing was difficult, and light from tall windows struggled to cut through the haze. Workers wiped sweat from their brows, their clothes marked by the environment, yet they carried on, adjusting to the conditions, finding small ways to endure the discomfort of each long shift. Noise was another constant companion. The pounding of hammers, the grinding of gears, and the hiss of steam created an unending roar. Conversation was nearly impossible, and workers relied more on gestures and glances than on spoken words. The brain learned to filter the sounds, but the ears never truly rested. This constant noise became part of the fabric of life, a backdrop to survival that few could escape. Despite the harshness, order existed within the chaos. Each worker had a role, a position along the great chain of production. Some spun thread, others wove cloth, while others managed the power of the steam engines. Like parts of the machines themselves, they were connected, each depending on the other, to keep the factory alive. This sense of routine, though demanding, provided structure to their days, a framework in which survival became possible. The factory floor also demanded discipline. Overseers moved among the rows, watching closely, urging faster work, and correcting mistakes. For workers, this presence was a constant reminder that their labor was measured and controlled. To endure, they learned to remain steady, avoiding conflict, and focusing on their tasks. It was a balance between maintaining dignity and following the relentless pace of industrial life. Children were often present too. Their small hands were seen as useful for delicate tasks like untangling threads or cleaning under machines. They rose early, worked long hours, and faced the same exhausting conditions as adults. Though childhood was shortened by labor, many endured with resilience, learning from older workers how to manage fatigue and protect themselves where possible. Their presence was a reminder of how deeply survival was tied to every member of a family. Rest was rare on the factory floor. Meals, when allowed, were brief and eaten quickly, sometimes on the same benches where work was performed. A few moments of stillness might come only when a machine was repaired or reset. Even then, the pause was short-lived, and soon the clatter returned, filling the hall once more. Workers treasured even these small pauses, using them to gather strength before returning to the endless rhythm. And so, life within the factory became a cycle. Arrive with the morning bell, endure the hours of noise and motion, then return home long after the sun had set. Each day was similar to the one before, and the repetition created a kind of numbness. Yet within this sameness, workers found ways to survive through routine, through endurance, and through the quiet determination to continue. The factory floor was harsh, but it was also the stage on which countless lives unfolded during the Industrial Revolution. The long hours inside the factory shaped not only the body, but also the mind. Days blurred into one another, each shift blending with the next, until time itself felt mechanical. The rhythm of machines became the rhythm of life, and workers adjusted their thoughts to fit the pattern. They found survival not in changing the system, but in bending themselves to its demands, day after day, night after night. Still, there were quiet strategies that helped them endure. Some workers hummed songs softly under the roar, letting a simple melody carry them through the hours. Others counted motions, turning repetitive tasks into a rhythm they could control. A few whispered prayers during moments of pause, seeking patience and strength to continue. These small habits, invisible to others, were vital lifelines in a world of endless labor. The body often carried the marks of the factory. Blisters on hands, soot on clothes, aching muscles that never fully rested. Yet despite the pain, most workers rose again each morning, returning to the gates when the bell rang. Survival was not about avoiding hardship, it was about enduring it with quiet determination. In this way, the human spirit proved stronger than the iron machines that surrounded it. As the years passed, the factory itself became part of daily identity. Children grew into adults within its walls, and entire families could trace their history through its labor. It was not a life chosen freely, but one accepted as the shape of reality. And within this acceptance came resilience, a strength that allowed entire communities to persist despite the demands of industrial progress. The factory floor, for all its harshness, became a place where endurance was constantly tested and proven. Outside the factory, the memory of its noise and heat lingered. Workers carried the rhythm home with them, the pounding of machines still echoing faintly in their minds. Yet the quiet of the evening gave them rest, and even a few hours of sleep offered strength for the next day. It was this cycle: work, rest, repeat, that defined survival during the Industrial Revolution. A cycle that demanded much, but also revealed the depth of human persistence. In the end, the factory was more than a workplace. It was a symbol of an age, a stage where countless lives unfolded in the shadow of steam and steel. Survival there was not easy, but it was real, steady, and deeply human. Each worker, each family, played a part in shaping this chapter of history. And though the machines were loud, the quiet endurance of the people remains louder in memory. As you listen to these stories tonight, let the rhythm slow down. Imagine the sound of the machines fading, replaced by the stillness of rest. Picture the workers leaving the gates, walking home under a dim sky, each step leading them closer to warmth and sleep. Their endurance, their patience, is part of the history we carry forward today. And in remembering them, we find our own sense of calm in the flow of time. If this story has guided you gently into relaxation tonight, consider subscribing so that you can return for more quiet journeys through history whenever you wish. It helps this channel bring you more peaceful stories told in the same calm way. And if you stay with us, the next video will take you on another journey into the past. We will explore how did ancient Greeks solve their legal disputes, a glimpse into the quiet but fascinating world of justice in ancient times. Family was at the center of survival during the Industrial Revolution. While machines shaped the rhythm of the factory floor, it was the family that provided balance, comfort, and continuity. Each member, young or old, played a role in keeping daily life moving forward. From preparing meals to contributing wages, the family was the invisible engine that helped workers endure the demands of industrial life. In many households, parents and children worked side by side. Some labored in the same factory, while others took on different roles in smaller workshops or home-based tasks. The contributions were shared, no matter how small, because survival depended on combining every effort. A few coins earned by a child, or extra stitching done by a mother at night, could make the difference between hunger and a full meal. Even grandparents, when present, carried responsibilities. They might care for the youngest children, while parents worked long shifts, or repair tools and clothing at home. Their wisdom, gained from earlier times before machines dominated, offered perspective. Though they could no longer endure the factory floor, they provided strength in quieter ways. The family was not divided by age, but connected, each generation holding up the others in different ways. Meals, though simple, became a vital ritual of togetherness. Bread, potatoes, and porridge were stretched to feed many mouths. Sometimes, small gardens provided fresh vegetables, or markets supplied what little could be afforded. Families sat close around the table, sharing not only food, but the comfort of each other's presence. In those moments, the harshness of the outside world faded, replaced by warmth, routine, and a sense of belonging. The home itself was modest, yet it held the family tightly together. Small brick houses with narrow rooms often sheltered many people under one roof. Privacy was rare, but closeness was constant, and this closeness built resilience. Families found ways to share space, to care for one another, and to transform the simplest shelter into a place of rest. Within those walls, survival was more than physical, it was emotional and spiritual, shaped by unity. Children carried a unique place in the family's survival. Their wages, though small, were part of the household income, and their presence at work reminded parents that they were not alone. At home, their laughter and energy gave moments of relief from exhaustion. Even in hard times, the sight of children playing or learning sparked hope for a future that might be gentler. They reminded families that survival was not only for the present, but for generations yet to come. Mothers often carried the heaviest burdens of balance. They managed the household, prepared meals, cared for younger children, and sometimes worked outside as well. Their ability to stretch limited resources into enough for everyone was a skill that meant the difference between comfort and hunger. Quietly, without recognition, they formed the foundation upon which the entire family stood. Their endurance was as important as any factory machine in keeping life running. Fathers, too, bore immense responsibility. They often worked the longest shifts, lifting heavy loads or tending dangerous machinery. Their wages, though hard-earned, kept the family afloat. At home, they offered guidance, discipline, and reassurance, even when fatigue pressed heavily upon them. Their role was not only to provide money, but to embody steadiness in a world filled with uncertainty. Family traditions, however small, gave strength. Storytelling by lamplight, simple songs sung together, or small celebrations of seasonal events provided meaning. These traditions linked families to their past, reminding them that even in times of change, some things remained the same. Through such rituals, families found balance between the old world and the new. They created stability that machines and factories could never provide. And so, in the midst of industrial smoke and noise, the family became a shelter, a place where endurance was shared, where burdens were divided, and where love, quiet, unspoken, but deeply presently, survival to continue. Without the unity of family, the Industrial Revolution would have broken countless lives. But with it, people found ways to persist, day after day, year after year. It was the family that gave the factory workers strength to rise each morning and return again to the world of machines. Families also carried stories of resilience across generations. Parents spoke quietly of their own struggles, so children would understand that hardship could be endured. These stories were not told to frighten, but to prepare, and to remind younger ones that survival was possible, even in the hardest times. Through words, values were passed down: patience, endurance, and the importance of caring for one another. The family became not just a unit of survival, but a school of life lessons that no factory could teach. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, families gathered close. Some read from simple books or newspapers, others stitched clothes by lamplight, while children whispered and played in the corners. The air was filled with quiet sounds of togetherness, so different from the roar of machines. These moments, though ordinary, carried healing power, allowing the body and mind to rest before the next long day. Survival was strengthened by these small but precious rituals of rest. Families living in industrial towns often leaned on neighbors as an extension of kinship. A borrowed loaf of bread, shared childcare, or a kind word across the street could ease the weight of hardship. These connections expanded the family beyond its walls, weaving communities together into a stronger net of support. Survival was not only a personal effort, but a collective one, made possible through trust and mutual aid. The family and community became two halves of the same lifeline. Even in scarcity, families tried to nurture learning for their children. Parents encouraged them to attend evening schools or to practice reading at home, believing that knowledge might open doors beyond the factory. Books, even small ones, were treasured, passed from hand to hand until the pages grew worn. This investment in learning was an act of hope, rooted in the belief that life could someday be gentler. The family, in guiding children to learn, planted seeds for a future beyond survival. Illness and injury were constant threats, yet families faced them together. When one member fell sick, others stepped in to care, to work harder, or to fill the gap in income. Though medicine was limited, the presence of family provided comfort stronger than any remedy. Survival was never a solitary achievement, but a shared effort. And in caring for the weakest, families showed their truest strength. For many, faith and values tied to family life offered stability. A quiet prayer before sleep, or the practice of kindness and patience, gave meaning to their endurance. These values did not remove hardship, but they shaped how families responded to it, turning survival into an act of resilience rather than despair. In a world dominated by machines, the heart of survival still rested in the unseen bonds of family and belief. Over time, the family adapted to industrial rhythms without losing its core. New routines replaced old ones, but the essence remained the same: care, unity, and shared responsibility. While the world outside seemed to change endlessly, the family provided a thread of continuity. It was this thread that allowed people to navigate uncertainty without losing themselves. Family was both anchor and compass in the storm of industrial change. The strength of family was often quiet, almost invisible. It did not roar like factory machines or shine like iron rails. Instead, it existed in the simple act of sharing bread, of mending clothes, of holding a child close at night. These actions, small but constant, built a foundation of survival more enduring than steel. They remind us that the greatest strength often lives in the simplest bonds. When we look back at the Industrial Revolution, we see not only the rise of machines and cities, but also the persistence of families. They were the ones who carried history forward, not in grand gestures, but in everyday endurance. Their survival was a quiet triumph, shaping the generations that followed. Without them, the progress of the age would have left far deeper scars. With them, humanity remained whole, even in the shadow of smoke and iron. And so, the family during the Industrial Revolution was more than a household. It was the heartbeat of survival, the center of resilience, and the shield against despair. In every meal, every shared story, and every act of care, the family proved its strength. Factories may have defined the age, but families defined endurance. And it is in their quiet persistence that we find the truest story of how ordinary workers survived the sweeping changes of their time. Finding shelter was one of the most basic needs for workers during the Industrial Revolution. Cities expanded quickly, and with them rows of brick houses rose side by side, built to hold the growing labor force. These homes were not luxurious, but they provided a roof, walls, and a place to rest after long hours. For many families, even a small, crowded house represented safety from the uncertainty of the streets. Shelter, however simple, became a cornerstone of survival in an age of rapid change. The houses were often narrow, with only 2 or 3 rooms. Multiple family members might share the same bed, or sleep close together on the floor. Privacy was rare, but closeness built resilience, and warmth was easier to keep when everyone huddled near. Each corner of the house was used with care, furniture was reused until it wore thin, and walls were patched with whatever materials could be found. In these humble homes, resourcefulness replaced comfort. Factories were usually close by, so workers lived within walking distance. The air outside was thick with smoke, but being near the workplace reduced travel time and costs. Streets filled with rows of nearly identical homes, their chimneys rising like markers of the industrial age. Life within these neighborhoods felt repetitive, but also familiar, a rhythm that workers could rely on. Survival was not just about the walls themselves, but about the location, the proximity to both work and community. Inside, the hearth was the heart of the home. A fire, small but steady, gave warmth in winter and allowed simple meals to be cooked. Families gathered around it at night, using its light to sew, read, or talk quietly after a long day. The fire itself was not the source of strength, it was a tool given by the will of the Almighty to ease human needs. Its warmth reminded families that even in a world of machines, there was still a space for rest and comfort. Clean water and sanitation were often limited. Many families relied on public pumps, sharing access with entire streets. Washing was done with effort, and keeping homes clean required constant work against soot and dirt. Illness was a common risk, yet families did their best to maintain order inside their small spaces. In this way, the home became not only a shelter from weather, but a defense against the hardships of crowded city life. Shelter also carried emotional weight. Beyond walls and roofs, it represented a place where families could close the door to the world outside. Within those walls, they could rest their bodies, share their meals, and find quiet togetherness. Even when conditions were modest, the home gave a sense of belonging. It was this feeling, more than the bricks or wood, that made the home a true refuge. Some families took pride in keeping their homes neat despite scarcity. A swept floor, a patched curtain, or a polished piece of reused furniture gave dignity to daily life. These small acts of care showed resilience, a refusal to let hardship define everything. Order within the home offered balance against the chaos of the factory. In this way, shelter was more than survival, it was a quiet form of self-respect. Children grew up in these tight spaces, their games often limited to narrow alleys or shared yards. They adapted to the environment, turning small corners into playgrounds and stairwells into hiding spots. The home shaped their early memories, teaching them to live closely with others and to appreciate even the smallest comforts. What might have seemed cramped to some became the backdrop of childhood resilience. Shelter, however simple, carried the power to nurture even in difficulty. During cold winters, homes became even more vital. Fires burned longer, blankets were shared, and families pressed close together for warmth. Outside, frost covered the streets, but inside, every bit of heat was treasured. Families learned to make do with little, closing shutters tightly, sealing gaps with cloth, and conserving fuel as much as possible. Winter nights tested endurance, but the shelter provided enough to carry them through until spring. Though many houses were identical in design, each family made theirs unique. A small shelf of books, a family heirloom, or a handmade quilt turned plain walls into something personal. These details gave the home character, even when the space was shared with too many people. In this way, shelter was not only a physical structure, but a canvas for memory and identity. Families carved out a sense of home in the midst of industrial uniformity. The neighborhood around these homes carried its own character. Streets were narrow, lined with cobblestones, and filled with the chatter of families moving in and out. Laundry hung between houses, and children played where space allowed. Though crowded and often noisy, these neighborhoods became an extension of the home itself. People survived not only through the shelter of their walls, but through the life of the streets outside. For many, rent was a constant concern. Wages from the factory were stretched thin, and paying for even a small house required sacrifice. Families sometimes took in lodgers, sharing what little space they had in exchange for a few coins. It added to the crowding, but it also kept the household afloat. Shelter, though essential, came at a cost that was always felt in the balance of survival. The wear and tear of industrial life left marks on the homes themselves. Smoke darkened the bricks, damp crept into walls, and wooden beams showed signs of age. Families repaired what they could with simple tools, patching leaks and strengthening weak spots. Each repair was a reminder of endurance, of refusing to let the home crumble despite limited means. These acts of care helped homes stand, year after year, against the weight of time and hardship. Inside, evenings were marked by the glow of lamplight. Oil lamps or candles flickered softly, casting shadows against walls. The light was faint, but it was enough for families to sit together, for parents to guide children in reading, or for quiet conversations to pass the time. This gentle light created a calm atmosphere, far removed from the harsh glare of factories. Shelter, in these hours, became a sanctuary of stillness. Though life was modest, homes carried dreams of better days. Parents imagined improvements, stronger roofs, larger rooms, cleaner air, and passed these hopes to their children. The shelter may have been small, but it was the foundation for imagining futures beyond survival. These dreams gave strength to endure the present, knowing that progress, however slow, could bring change. Hope found its home within the walls of even the simplest shelter. Seasonal changes tested the resilience of these houses. In summer, windows were propped open to let air move through stuffy rooms. In autumn, rain pattered against rooftops, and families listened while gathered together inside. Each season reshaped the home's importance, reminding families how deeply they depended on these walls. The shelter was not perfect, but it adapted with them, just as they adapted to it. The closeness of family within these homes also meant shared burdens. When illness spread, it often touched everyone under the same roof. Yet that same closeness brought comfort, as members cared for one another through long nights of recovery. In these moments, the home revealed both its fragility and its strength. It held both the risks of crowded living and the warmth of shared compassion. Visitors sometimes noted the simplicity of working-class homes, but for those who lived inside, each detail carried meaning. A small rug, a handmade tool, or a simple pot was not just an object, but a piece of daily survival. These homes reflected the effort and endurance of the people within them. The shelter became a mirror of their lives, ordinary, difficult, but deeply resilient. When storms raged outside, the sound of rain on rooftops or wind against walls reminded families of the protection their homes offered. The shelter was not flawless, yet it gave enough to keep danger at bay. Within those walls, children slept safely, parents found rest, and elders shared stories. In a world of constant industrial noise, these moments of quiet protection carried immeasurable value. The home was both shield and comfort against the unpredictability of the outside world, and so, shelter during the Industrial Revolution was more than brick and mortar. It was the container of family life, the keeper of warmth, the stage for resilience. Though modest and often crowded, it gave people the strength to rise each morning and face the factories once again. These homes, humble as they were, stood as anchors in a time of change. They remind us that even in the harshest conditions, the simplest shelter can carry the deepest meaning. Food was one of the most important concerns for Victorian workers. After long hours in factories or workshops, the body needed fuel to endure another day. Yet meals were often plain, shaped by what was affordable rather than what was desired. Bread, potatoes, and porridge were the daily staples, filling enough to quiet hunger, but rarely varied. For many families, survival meant making the most out of simple ingredients, stretching them to feed every member of the household. Markets became essential spaces for workers. Stalls lined the streets with vegetables, grains, and sometimes meat, though prices could shift quickly with supply. Families carefully planned what little money they had, choosing what would last the longest or provide the most energy. On lucky days, a bit of fresh produce or fish might be brought home, but on most days, the meals remained repetitive. The market represented both possibility and limitation, shaping the rhythm of every week. Meals were often prepared with resourcefulness. A pot of stew could be stretched by adding more water, or bread might be made from cheaper grains. Families reused leftovers, saving every crumb and bone for the next dish. Cooking was done over small hearth fires or simple stoves, requiring careful attention to fuel. Nothing was wasted, because each item represented effort, wages, and survival itself. Through this frugality, households found ways to keep hunger away. Children grew up familiar with simple tastes. A bowl of porridge in the morning, bread with butter at midday, and potatoes at night formed the common pattern. While occasional treats, like fruit or sweets, appeared, they were rare and treasured. For children, these small variations brought joy, a reminder that life held moments beyond repetition. Their diets were modest, yet their energy was constantly needed for both work and play. Protein, when available, came in small amounts. A slice of meat, a piece of cheese, or a bit of fish was often shared among the entire family. Eggs, beans, or lentils were sometimes used to provide strength at a lower cost. Though limited, these foods were carefully divided so that every member could have a portion. In this way, meals reflected fairness and sacrifice, as parents often gave more to children than to themselves. Gardens offered small relief for those with access to a bit of land. Families grew potatoes, cabbages, or carrots in small patches behind their homes. These gardens did not erase hardship, but they provided a little variety and independence from the market. The act of tending plants, of seeing food grow slowly under the will of the Almighty, gave families a sense of control in uncertain times. Even a handful of vegetables could lighten the monotony of meals. Meals were also moments of family connection. Sitting together after a long day, workers shared not just food, but conversation and comfort. The meal table became a place where exhaustion was eased by laughter, stories, or quiet companionship. Even when the food was plain, the act of sharing it created warmth. In this way, meals nourished not only the body, but also the spirit. Cooking required careful planning. Fuel was costly, so fires were managed efficiently, often used for multiple dishes at once. Pots and pans were simple, and recipes were designed to be filling rather than fancy. Women in the household often balanced this work, managing both preparation and budgeting. Their skill turned limited resources into sustaining meals, showing how survival depended as much on ingenuity as on ingredients. Bread, perhaps more than any other food, symbolized survival. Bakers rose early to prepare loaves that fed entire neighborhoods. For workers, bread was the daily constant, eaten at nearly every meal. Its presence on the table meant security, while its absence meant hunger. This simple food carried weight far beyond its taste, representing stability in a life marked by uncertainty. Drinks were modest as well. Water, milk, when affordable, and weak tea formed the usual choices. Tea, though simple, offered warmth and comfort, a small luxury in the midst of routine. Families shared it in the evenings, letting the steam and flavor mark a pause in the day. Even something as small as a cup of tea reminded workers that life could hold moments of rest alongside struggle. These little comforts gave meaning to survival, making each day a little easier to bear. The rhythm of meals followed the rhythm of work. Breakfast came before dawn, often no more than bread or porridge, to prepare workers for the day ahead. A midday meal, eaten quickly if time allowed, gave enough strength to continue. The evening meal was the largest, taken at home, shared by all who returned from the factory. Though the foods were simple, the structure of these meals gave order and steadiness in a world that often felt unpredictable. Special occasions brought small changes to the table. On holidays or rare celebrations, families might share meat pies, roasted potatoes, or sweet puddings. These meals stood out in memory, marking moments of joy against the backdrop of daily repetition. Children especially remembered such days, treasuring the taste and warmth long after the food was gone. Survival was not only about filling the stomach, but about creating these bright points of comfort in the flow of time. Hunger, however, was never far away. When wages were cut, or when illness prevented work, meals became smaller and less frequent. Bread might be stretched thinner, and meat disappeared altogether. Families endured these periods by relying on neighbors, gardens, or sheer endurance. The presence of food, even in small amounts, became a symbol of resilience against hardship. Each bite carried meaning, reminding families of their strength in the face of scarcity. Children felt the effects of food scarcity most deeply. Their growing bodies needed energy, yet their meals were often the smallest. Parents, driven by care, sometimes gave up their own portions to feed the youngest first. This sacrifice showed the quiet strength of love within families. Food became more than nutrition, it was a measure of compassion, a reflection of the bonds that held households together. Despite the plainness of meals, traditions formed around them. Families prayed quietly before eating, offering thanks for what was present, no matter how small. This practice gave meals deeper meaning, reminding everyone that food was not guaranteed, but provided through the will of the Almighty. Such gratitude added a layer of peace to the act of eating, turning each meal into a moment of reflection. Even in scarcity, there was space for thankfulness. Workers often spoke of food as both fuel and comfort. A loaf of bread gave the strength to endure another day in the factory, while a warm stew brought calm at night. The physical nourishment allowed survival, but the emotional comfort gave purpose to that survival. Meals carried both weight and meaning, balancing the demands of the body and the needs of the spirit. They became a reminder that even in hardship, life contained moments of care. Communities sometimes joined together around food. Charities and neighbors shared meals during the hardest times, creating bonds that strengthened the collective spirit. A pot of soup offered by one family could stretch across several households, each person contributing what they had. These acts of sharing reminded people that survival was not only an individual effort. Food connected communities, reinforcing the ties that held them through the Industrial Revolution. As the years passed, new foods slowly entered the diets of workers. Cheaper imports, improved farming, and gradual wage changes brought small additions. Rice, beans, or preserved goods sometimes appeared on the table, widening the variety of meals. These changes were gradual, but they represented progress, however modest. Each new flavor was a step toward a future where meals could be more than just survival. Still, the memory of plain, repetitive meals remained with those who lived through the time. Workers recalled bread eaten daily, potatoes boiled again and again, and porridge filling the mornings. The simplicity left deep impressions, shaping how they viewed food even in later life. For many, the memory of scarcity created lifelong habits of frugality and gratitude. Survival through such meals became part of their identity, a mark of resilience carried forward. And so, food on the table during the Industrial Revolution was both a challenge and a comfort. It tested the limits of resourcefulness, yet it also brought families together in unity. Each loaf of bread, each shared potato, each cup of tea was more than just sustenance. It was a symbol of endurance, of patience, and of the quiet strength that allowed workers to rise again each day. In the simplest of meals, the story of survival was written clearly, line by line, across generations. Community was one of the strongest forms of survival during the Industrial Revolution. While families carried the immediate burden of daily life, neighbors and wider networks provided the extra support needed to endure. In crowded towns and factory neighborhoods, people leaned on one another for help, advice, and companionship. Survival was rarely an isolated effort. It was built through the connections between households, weaving individuals into something stronger than themselves. On the narrow streets where workers lived, sharing was common. A tool borrowed, a loaf of bread exchanged, or a few coins lent could make a significant difference for a struggling household. These small acts of kindness were not formal agreements, but gestures of trust that allowed survival to continue. Neighbors often remembered who helped them, and in turn offered support when roles were reversed. This cycle of giving and receiving created a hidden safety net. Children were often cared for by more than just their parents. When mothers and fathers worked long hours in factories, neighbors or older relatives stepped in to watch over the youngest. This informal care system ensured that children were not left alone and that families could meet their responsibilities without fear. In this way, the community extended the family's reach, becoming part of its survival structure. Shared responsibility gave comfort in uncertain times. Charitable groups also played a role. Churches, missions, and local organizations provided small amounts of food, clothing, or shelter during moments of crisis. Though the support was limited, it reminded workers that they were not entirely forgotten. These institutions offered a sense of belonging, and their assistance, however small, lightened the weight of daily struggle. Survival was never easy, but with community aid, it became less overwhelming. Markets and public spaces created opportunities for connection. Workers gathered not only to buy food or goods, but to exchange news, advice, and encouragement. In these shared places, bonds of trust grew, and individuals found comfort in the presence of others who understood the same struggles. Community life was woven into these interactions, transforming ordinary routines into threads of resilience. The market stall or street corner became places of quiet support. Illness was another test of community strength. When one worker fell sick, neighbors often stepped in with food, care, or temporary help with labor. Though resources were limited, the willingness to share remained strong. Communities recognized that survival depended on keeping everyone afloat, not just oneself. This collective spirit prevented many from slipping too deeply into despair during times of hardship. Even in moments of grief, community support was visible. Funerals, though modest, often drew neighbors together to show respect and to assist families in mourning. Shared sorrow created deeper connections, reminding workers that loss was part of life, but not faced alone. These rituals of support carried healing power, offering strength for families to continue despite their pain. Community presence transformed grief into collective resilience. Celebrations, though rare, also bound people together. A holiday, a festival, or even a simple gathering gave workers a chance to rest, to share joy, and to step outside the rhythm of labor. These moments were small, but their effect was lasting. They reminded communities that survival was not only about endurance, but also about finding light within the darkness. Shared joy was just as essential as shared responsibility. For workers new to the city, community provided orientation. Migrants arriving from rural areas often struggled to adapt, but neighbors offered guidance, advice, and sometimes lodging. These networks eased the transition, making survival in an unfamiliar environment more manageable. The kindness of strangers often grew into lasting friendships, adding more threads to the fabric of community. In this way, urban life became less isolating, and survival became more collective. Above all, community support offered a sense of belonging. In the noise and anonymity of industrial towns, knowing that neighbors would help gave workers reassurance. This trust allowed them to face each new day with steadier hearts. Community was not perfect, and conflicts did exist, but its role in survival cannot be overstated. It was the quiet backbone that carried individuals through the weight of the Industrial Revolution. Sometimes, community support appeared in the simplest ways. A neighbor offering a warm meal to a tired worker, or helping to carry coal for an elderly resident, made a difference larger than the act itself. These gestures reminded people that survival was not measured only by strength or endurance, but also by kindness. In the smallest acts, communities revealed the depth of their resilience. Support became a daily language, spoken without words, but felt in every corner of life. Work itself often fostered community ties. Inside the factory, workers who shared the same struggles also shared advice and strategies for coping. They watched out for one another in dangerous conditions, warning of risks or helping after accidents. This bond, born in hardship, extended beyond the factory walls. Friendships forged through labor became threads of support that endured across years. Community also offered a sense of identity. Belonging to a street, a block, or a neighborhood created pride. Even in modest surroundings, people referred to their areas as home, despite the soot and noise, because of the connections woven there. These bonds of place tied individuals not just to buildings, but to each other. Survival was strengthened by knowing that they were part of something larger than themselves. During shortages, communities often pooled resources. A loaf of bread shared, or a few coins collected, allowed families to survive weeks that might otherwise have broken them. The collective effort provided reassurance, showing that even in scarcity, generosity remained alive. Communities did not erase hardship, but they made it less isolating. Together, workers faced the challenges of industrial life with a united front. Even leisure reflected the strength of community. On Sundays, when factories often fell silent, neighbors gathered in parks, churchyards, or public squares. They shared songs, stories, and simple games, giving their minds and bodies a rare chance to rest. These gatherings, though informal, nourished the spirit. Community life was not only about survival, it was about remembering the joy of being human together. Stories and traditions also flowed through communities. Elders shared memories of earlier times, and workers exchanged tales of resilience and hope. These stories became a collective memory, binding people together with shared understanding. They reassured everyone that they were not alone in their struggles. Through storytelling, the community passed down not only history, but also strength. In moments of uncertainty, communities offered calm. When rumors of wage cuts or factory closures spread, neighbors gathered to discuss, to plan, and to prepare. This sense of unity lessened fear, turning worry into action. Even if solutions were limited, the act of facing hardship together gave people courage. Support was not only material, but also emotional, found in the presence of others who understood. Children grew up absorbing the lessons of community life. They saw generosity, patience, and cooperation modeled daily in the streets. These experiences shaped how they viewed survival, teaching them that strength was never only individual. As they grew older, they carried these values into their own families, continuing the cycle of support. In this way, community was both present strength and future inheritance. Though industrial cities were crowded and harsh, communities softened their edges. Neighbors, charities, shared rituals, and small acts of kindness stitched together a fabric strong enough to withstand hardship. Without this fabric, survival would have been far more difficult. Community, quiet yet powerful, carried people through the long years of industrial transformation. Its presence remains one of the clearest examples of how human connection shapes endurance. And so, the story of community support during the Industrial Revolution is one of quiet triumph. Not through grand gestures, but through countless small acts that sustained families and neighborhoods. Survival depended not only on wages and shelter, but on trust, kindness, and cooperation. In the end, it was community that reminded workers they were not alone, that their struggles were shared, and that endurance was always stronger together. This is the silent strength that echoed through the narrow streets of industrial towns. Even in the busiest years of the Industrial Revolution, workers searched for small escapes from the weight of labor. These escapes were rarely grand or costly, but they carried deep meaning. They gave workers moments to breathe, to remember life beyond the factory floor, and to feel a sense of freedom, however brief. Survival was not only about enduring work, it was also about finding rest outside of it. Sundays became a precious pause. With many factories closed, families walked slowly through parks, churchyards, or quiet fields at the edges of town. The change in rhythm was refreshing, even if only for a day. Children played freely, adults exchanged conversation, and the city seemed gentler without the roar of machines. These Sundays were not simply days off, they were small escapes that preserved balance in life. Markets also offered a kind of release. While they were places to buy necessities, they were also spaces of energy and color. The smell of fresh produce, the chatter of sellers, and the movement of crowds created an atmosphere far removed from the factory. Workers lingered at stalls, enjoying the variety and rhythm of trade. Even if money was scarce, the act of walking through the market brought relief from routine. Stories played a special role in these escapes. Workers and families shared tales at night, sometimes real, sometimes imagined. By lamplight, words carried people into other worlds, away from the noise and repetition of daily labor. Storytelling did not cost money, yet it gave the gift of imagination, of leaving the factory behind for a few moments. It was a reminder that escape could be found in the mind as much as in the body. Music and song also shaped small escapes. Workers sang softly at home, or listened to traveling musicians in the streets. A tune, even a simple one, brought comfort and rhythm beyond the machines. Music was not only entertainment, it was a form of release, carrying emotions that could not be spoken. In these melodies, workers found both joy and peace, however temporary. Books and pamphlets were treasured escapes for those who could read. Cheaply printed materials circulated widely, filled with stories, news, and ideas. Workers read by candlelight, their eyes tired but eager to enter another world. For many, reading was not only a skill, but a refuge, a way to step outside their own lives for a short time. The pages became doors to escape the narrow walls of crowded homes and factories. For children, play was the simplest and most natural escape. They invented games in alleys, used scraps of wood or cloth as toys, and filled small spaces with laughter. These moments gave them strength to face the demands of work and school. Play was survival in disguise, teaching them resilience while giving them joy. Their laughter lightened the burden of adults too, bringing brief sparks of happiness into daily life. Some workers found escape in walking. Even a short stroll at night through streets, quiet after the day's labor, offered calm. The sound of footsteps against stone, the cool air after the heat of factories, and the silence of dimly lit streets created space for thought. Walking required nothing but time, yet it gave workers freedom of movement, a sense of control often absent inside factories. These walks were moments of meditation, simple but powerful. Gatherings with neighbors offered another form of relief. Sitting outside doorsteps, sharing stories, or exchanging advice created small communities of rest. Laughter and conversation softened the harshness of industrial life. These informal meetings required no planning, yet they gave workers comfort, reminding them they were not alone. In shared words and quiet company, burdens became lighter. Even silence itself became a form of escape. After the roar of machines, the stillness of a quiet room or the hush of night felt extraordinary. Workers valued these moments, letting their minds rest in the absence of sound. Silence was rare, but when found, it carried healing power. It reminded workers that beneath the clamor of industry, there was still space for calm, reflection, and peace. Festivals and fairs, though rare, gave workers treasured memories. Bright stalls, traveling performers, and colorful decorations broke the monotony of industrial towns. For a short time, laughter replaced the clatter of machines, and joy spread through crowded streets. Families saved coins for these occasions, knowing the memories would last long after the fair ended. Such moments of escape were vital reminders that life contained more than labor. Nature, when accessible, became another quiet refuge. Workers sometimes wandered to nearby fields, rivers, or hills beyond the smoke of the city. Breathing cleaner air and hearing the sounds of birds or water provided calm. Even if the visit was brief, the memory of green spaces lingered, offering mental escape during long factory hours. Nature reminded people of a slower, gentler world beyond the walls of industry. For some, faith provided their deepest escape. Quiet prayers before sleep, or reflection during days of rest, created space for inner peace. Faith did not remove hardship, but it shaped how workers endured it, providing strength to carry burdens with patience. These spiritual moments were a form of escape that required nothing but sincerity. They allowed people to rise each day with steadier hearts. Escapes were often woven into routines without notice. A mother humming while cooking, a father carving wood in the evening, or children playing clapping games at the doorstep were small retreats from hardship. These moments seemed ordinary, yet they built resilience in quiet ways. They showed that even within struggle, the mind could carve out pockets of relief. Escape was not always grand, it was often hidden in daily gestures. Even laughter carried weight as an escape. Workers joked about the machines, teased one another lightly, and found humor in small mishaps. This humor was not careless, but deliberate, a way to release tension in environments that demanded constant seriousness. Laughter echoed through streets and homes, softening the harsh rhythm of work. It proved that even in difficulty, joy could survive. Escapes also helped preserve memory. By stepping away from the factory, workers remembered who they were beyond their labor. A story told, a song sung, or a walk taken kept their identities alive. These escapes reminded them that life was not entirely defined by machines. They were human first, workers second, and these moments reinforced that truth. Children, again, carried much of this spirit of escape. Their games, songs, and imaginations pulled adults into lighter moods. Watching children play became a reminder of innocence and possibility. In their laughter, parents found strength to face another day. Children, without knowing it, provided the community with some of its most valuable escapes. Escapes from work often blurred into dreams. After long shifts, workers drifted to sleep, imagining better days, calmer lives, or simple joys yet to come. Dreams became another form of survival, carrying the mind away from the factory floor. Though the morning bell always returned them to labor, the memory of dreams lingered, providing subtle strength. Sleep itself was a sanctuary, restoring the will to endure. Looking back, these small escapes may appear minor. A song, a story, a walk, or a shared laugh might seem insignificant compared to the roar of industry. Yet for workers, these were lifelines, moments that held their humanity intact. Without them, survival would have been far more fragile. With them, people carried enough strength to endure. And so, the story of small escapes is not about grand victories. It is about the quiet balance between hardship and relief, between labor and rest. In these escapes, workers found the means to continue, to protect their spirits, and to keep hope alive. Survival was not only measured by endurance in the factory, but by the ability to find light beyond it. These small escapes, though fleeting, shaped the rhythm of life during the Industrial Revolution. Education slowly began to touch the lives of Victorian workers. In the early years, many children had little chance to attend school, as their labor was needed for family survival. Yet, over time, opportunities grew, with evening classes, Sunday schools, and community efforts opening doors to knowledge. Learning became a quiet form of hope, a way to imagine futures beyond the factory floor. Each lesson carried the promise of something different, however distant it seemed. Workers often attended night schools after long shifts. Their bodies were tired, but their minds sought the strength of letters and numbers. Sitting in small, dimly lit rooms, they practiced reading, writing, and basic arithmetic. The effort was heavy, yet the goal was clear: to gain skills that might offer a path out of the harshest labor. These nights of learning were steps toward hope, even if progress came slowly. Children, too, found their way into classrooms. Simple wooden benches, chalkboards, and dog-eared books became part of their days. Teachers guided them patiently, knowing that education was a fragile gift in communities stretched thin. The children carried both exhaustion from work and curiosity for learning, balancing duty with the promise of knowledge. For them, school was more than lessons, it was a glimpse into a world where life could be different. Literacy opened new worlds for workers. With the ability to read, Newspapers and pamphlets became windows to information. Stories, poems, and even practical guides to farming or health circulated in their hands. The written word gave them voices beyond their neighborhoods, connecting them to ideas and events far away. In this connection, workers felt part of something larger, expanding their vision of what life might hold. Learning also nurtured effect. The act of holding a book, of signing one's own name, or of reading a passage aloud created dignity. Workers who mastered these skills felt a sense of accomplishment beyond their labor. Knowledge gave them identity, not just as laborers, but as thinkers and learners. This quiet pride fed hope, reminding them that survival was not only physical, but also intellectual. Parents encouraged children to learn when possible. Even if it meant sacrifices at home, families valued education as an investment in the future. Mothers and fathers who had grown up without schooling hoped their children might escape the cycle of endless labor. The dream was not of wealth, but of stability, health, and dignity. Education was seen as a ladder, fragile yet essential, leading toward those hopes. Communities often supported schools through shared effort. Churches, charities, and local groups provided spaces, materials, and volunteer teachers. Though resources were thin, the determination to teach remained strong. The presence of a schoolhouse, however modest, represented a seed of change planted in the heart of the neighborhood. It gave families a place to direct their hopes, a sign that the future could be brighter than the present. The act of learning was itself an escape from hardship. For a few hours, reading and writing carried the mind away from the roar of machines. Numbers on a chalkboard or words on a page offered a rhythm different from labor. In classrooms, time slowed and possibilities expanded. Education was not only practical, it was a form of mental freedom, a chance to imagine life beyond survival. Books became treasures in these communities, passed from one household to another. Worn and marked with use, they carried knowledge across many hands. A single book could influence dozens of lives, sparking conversations, dreams, and new ideas. Families valued them not for their condition, but for the worlds they opened. Each page became a small step toward hope. And so, learning during the Industrial Revolution was not simply about literacy. It was about possibility. The chance to look beyond the daily grind and to see paths not yet walked. Education gave workers and their children tools for survival, but more importantly, it gave them the courage to hope. And hope, once planted, became one of the strongest forms of endurance in the face of change. Some workers discovered learning through religious or community readings. Verses, moral stories, and short lessons became their first exposure to literacy. Though simple, these texts opened doors, giving workers the foundation to explore other forms of knowledge. In quiet gatherings, words were spoken, repeated, and remembered. Through them, the seeds of hope were planted in minds that had once known only labor. For children, school offered not only lessons, but a chance to be children again. Away from factory noise, they could sit, listen, and imagine. They practiced letters on slates, repeated tables aloud, and sometimes sang songs to help memory. These activities gave rhythm to their learning, balancing the demands of work with moments of lightness. Education allowed them to glimpse a different kind of childhood, one shaped by discovery rather than only duty. Even the smallest progress mattered. A child reading a sign aloud for the first time, or a parent writing their own name, carried significance beyond measure. These milestones were celebrated quietly within families, strengthening the belief that education was worth every sacrifice. They symbolized progress, however small, and progress meant hope. Each step forward in learning was a step forward in survival itself. Education also changed how communities viewed the future. Knowledge created new ambitions, new possibilities for work, and new ways of thinking about society. Families began to imagine that their children might escape the harshest conditions. The presence of learning planted the belief that change, though slow, was possible, and belief was as powerful as bread or shelter in sustaining endurance. Libraries, however modest, offered treasures. Collections of donated books became community resources where eager readers borrowed volumes to expand their horizons. Even those who could not buy books found access through shared spaces. These libraries symbolized collective hope, showing that knowledge could belong to everyone. They stood as small but powerful monuments of resilience amid industrial towns. For many adults, learning was a second chance. Those who had entered factories as children embraced opportunities to study later in life. Their determination revealed that education was not bound by age. It was never too late to read, to write, or to count. Each adult who chose to learn proved that survival was not only about enduring the present, but about preparing for a better future. Hope also came from the stories people encountered through education. Tales of discovery, history, and invention inspired imagination. Workers began to see their own struggles as part of a larger story, one in which progress was always possible. These stories nourished resilience, showing that hardship could lead to growth. In this way, learning was not just knowledge, it was encouragement, woven into words. The connection between learning and dignity grew strong. A person who could read contracts, letters, or instructions gained independence. They were less vulnerable to deceit and more capable of protecting their families. This practical power gave workers confidence, reminding them that they were not powerless in the face of change. Education became both shield and lantern, guarding survival while lighting the path ahead. Generations carried the fruits of these efforts. Children who learned to read passed knowledge to their siblings, and parents shared what they had learned with neighbors. Education spread slowly, but it spread surely, carried hand to hand, voice to voice. This steady passing of knowledge gave hope that the future would be brighter than the past. It was survival, transformed into progress, and so learning and hope walked hand in hand during the Industrial Revolution. Knowledge did not erase hardship, but it gave meaning to endurance. Families and communities who embraced education found strength not only for survival, but for transformation. Each lesson, each book, each word carried the quiet promise of change. And in that promise, Victorian workers discovered that survival could hold within it the seeds of a better tomorrow. Hardship was a constant companion during the Industrial Revolution. Factories demanded endless hours, homes were crowded, and illnesses spread easily in smoky towns. For workers, survival was not about avoiding these difficulties, but about finding ways to endure them. Coping with hardship became an art of patience, resilience, and quiet strength. Every day carried its burdens, yet every day also carried the determination to continue. Illness was one of the greatest challenges. Without modern medicine, even small ailments could become dangerous. Families cared for the sick with home remedies, shared advice, and the comfort of presence. Survival in sickness often depended not on cures, but on care. This shared responsibility revealed the depth of compassion within households and communities. Injuries from factories were also common. Machines moved quickly, and a moment's distraction could cause lasting harm. Workers supported one another, stepping in to cover tasks or helping an injured neighbor return home. These acts of solidarity softened the harshness of industrial labor. Though accidents left scars, both physical and emotional, communities carried one another through them. Fatigue weighed heavily on workers. Rising before dawn and returning home after dark left little room for rest. To cope, families created routines that maximized the few hours they had together. A shared meal, a short story, or even moments of silence helped restore some strength. These small rituals became anchors against the tide of exhaustion. Financial hardship was another constant trial. Wages were often low, and prices shifted with markets. Families coped by stretching resources, finding extra work, or taking in boarders. Sacrifices were made quietly, with parents often giving up their share of food for the children. Though difficult, these choices showed the quiet strength of love guiding survival. Harsh weather added to the burden. Winters brought biting cold, and homes struggled to hold heat. Workers patched clothes, sealed windows with cloth, and shared blankets to keep warm. Summers, though brighter, carried stifling heat in crowded streets and factories. Each season demanded its own strategies of endurance. Families adapted, finding resilience in resourcefulness. The emotional strain was heavy as well. The monotony of labor, the uncertainty of wages, and the constant risk of illness weighed on minds. Workers coped through conversation, storytelling, and moments of laughter. These acts released tension, reminding them that they were not only laborers, but human beings with emotions worth honoring. Mental resilience was as vital as physical endurance. Faith provided another form of coping. Quiet prayers, shared values, and the practice of patience shaped how families endured hardship. Belief gave meaning to suffering, reminding them that trials could be met with dignity and perseverance. This spiritual strength did not remove pain, but it framed it in a way that allowed endurance. Faith became a source of calm within the noise of industry. Children also inspired resilience. Their energy, curiosity, and joy reminded adults of life's brightness, even in dark times. Watching children play or succeed in school lifted spirits, fueling the will to persist. In caring for the young, families found purpose that outweighed the hardship of labor. The next generation became both a burden and a blessing, a reason to continue despite difficulties. Coping with hardship also meant finding beauty in small things. The glow of lamplight, the comfort of bread shared at a table, the quiet of night after noise. Workers noticed these details, cherishing them as gentle reminders that life held peace as well as struggle. These moments did not erase hardship, but they softened it. And in that softness, endurance grew stronger, carrying people forward one day at a time. Families sometimes leaned on humor to cope. Jokes about factory bells, playful comments about overseers, or laughter over small mishaps lightened the heavy air. Humor was not a denial of hardship, but a release, a way to remind themselves that joy was still possible. In the sound of shared laughter, the weight of labor grew a little lighter. This was resilience expressed through smiles. Coping also came through creativity. Workers mended clothes with care, carved small toys from scraps of wood, or embroidered patterns onto fabric. These acts, though practical, carried beauty that softened daily life. Creativity offered control in a world that often felt overwhelming. Through simple crafts, people reminded themselves that they could still shape something with their own hands. Some workers found strength in nature, even within industrial towns. A small patch of garden, A potted plant on a windowsill or a walk to the edges of the city gave peace. Nature offered contrast to soot and smoke, reminding people of cycles older and gentler than machines. The sight of green leaves or the sound of birds gave quiet comfort. These glimpses of nature were lifelines in crowded streets. Hardship was also endured through cooperation. Families worked together, dividing responsibilities and sharing burdens. When one struggled, another stepped in to carry more weight. This teamwork was unspoken but constant, a rhythm that kept households balanced. Survival was rarely individual, it was collective, built on shared effort day after day. Memory itself became a coping tool. Elders told stories of earlier times, of rural life, or of past struggles endured. These tales reminded younger generations that hardship was not new, and that survival had always required patience. Memory gave perspective, framing present challenges as part of a larger human story. In this perspective, people found courage to continue. Resilience also grew from acceptance. Workers knew that life was not easy, yet they chose to endure rather than despair. This acceptance was not resignation, but a form of strength. By acknowledging reality, they found clarity in how to face it. Endurance became an act of quiet courage, repeated every day without fanfare. Children, again, were central to coping. Their presence reminded families that hardship carried meaning because it was endured for the sake of the next generation. Parents found purpose in protecting, teaching, and guiding their children through difficult times. The hardships of today became investments in tomorrow. This vision of the future softened the sharp edges of the present. Coping with hardship also meant leaning on faith in progress. Workers saw small improvements, new schools, safer practices, modest increases in wages, and believed more might come. These glimpses of change gave hope that endurance would not be in vain. Even if progress was slow, it carried the promise of relief. Hope was the invisible companion that walked alongside hardship. At night, the act of rest itself was a coping mechanism. After long shifts, workers lay in crowded rooms, yet found peace in closing their eyes. Sleep was more than recovery, it was an escape, a chance to let the body and mind drift away from the weight of daily labor. In dreams, hardship loosened its grip, and mornings could begin with renewed strength. Rest was survival's most faithful ally, and so, coping with hardship during the Industrial Revolution was not about eliminating pain. It was about meeting it with patience, creativity, community, and hope. Each act of endurance, however small, carried families through another day. Workers survived not because hardship was absent, but because they learned how to live within it. Their quiet resilience remains a reminder that even in the hardest times, the human spirit can bend, endure, and carry forward. The story of Victorian workers is, above all, a story of survival. Factories, crowded homes, and long hours created a life filled with difficulty, yet people endured. They rose each morning, walked through smoky streets, and faced the endless rhythm of machines. Their strength was not loud or celebrated, but quiet and steady, woven into the fabric of daily life. This quiet strength is what truly defined the age. Survival was not only about the body, but also about the mind. Workers balanced exhaustion with resilience, turning routines into anchors. They carried burdens without complaint, teaching themselves patience in every motion. Endurance became their greatest skill, a lesson repeated day after day. It was this mental strength that allowed them to continue when circumstances felt unchanging. The strength of survival also lived in families. Parents, children, and grandparents worked together, each contributing in their own way. Unity gave them resilience, for no individual could carry the load alone. Families created balance, sharing food, shelter, and emotional support. Within these bonds, survival became less of a burden and more of a shared journey. Communities added another layer of strength. Neighbors who lent tools, shared meals, or watched over children built networks of endurance. Collective support created a safety net where resources were scarce. This sense of belonging softened hardship, reminding workers they were not alone. In community, survival transformed into resilience, multiplied across many lives. Faith and values shaped survival too. Quiet prayers, patience, and belief gave meaning to their struggles. Families held to principles of kindness, sacrifice, and care, even when conditions were harsh. This spiritual strength turned survival into something more than mere endurance. It gave workers dignity, and dignity gave them courage. Hope was another form of strength. Education, small improvements in wages, and the dream of better futures for children carried people forward. Even when progress was slow, hope provided light within dark times. Workers believed that survival today could lead to transformation tomorrow. This belief was often their strongest shield against despair. The strength of survival was seen in routine. Rising before dawn, working long shifts, returning home for a simple meal, and repeating it all again. This pattern, though exhausting, became a rhythm of persistence. Survival lived in repetition, in the ability to face the same demands without breaking. Each completed day became proof of their resilience. Strength also came from finding joy in small things. A story told by lamplight, a walk in the park, or a child's laughter reminded workers of life beyond labor. These small joys restored balance, giving meaning to endurance. Survival was never only about struggle, it was also about preserving moments of peace. These joys gave life texture, even in times of scarcity. Generations carried this strength forward. Children who grew up in industrial towns learned resilience from their parents' example. They saw hardship endured with patience, and they absorbed those lessons into their own lives. This inheritance of endurance became one of the Industrial Revolution's quiet legacies. Strength was passed not only through wages or skills, but through the spirit of survival itself. And so, survival during the Industrial Revolution was not an accident. It was built from determination, community, hope, and patience. Workers lived through conditions that could have broken them, yet they endured. Their story is not just about hardship, but about the strength found within it. This strength carried them forward, shaping both their time and the generations that followed. Strength was also visible in how workers accepted change. The old world of fields and quiet towns faded, replaced by factories and crowded streets. Yet, instead of giving in to despair, they adapted. They adjusted their skills, their routines, and their lives to fit the demands of the new age. This ability to bend without breaking was one of the clearest signs of their endurance. In many ways, their strength was invisible to history. Records often tell of machines, inventions, and great industrial leaders. But behind those stories were countless ordinary workers whose survival made the progress possible. Their quiet contributions, though rarely celebrated, formed the true backbone of the Industrial Revolution. Without them, the story of industry would never have been written. Resilience was not uniforms. Some days were heavier than others. There were moments of hopelessness, when hunger, illness, or loss made endurance nearly impossible. Yet even in those times, families and communities found ways to continue. A shared loaf of bread, a neighbor's support, or a child's laughter became enough to carry through. This strength did not erase pain, but it kept people moving forward despite it. The endurance of workers also left lessons for the future. They showed that survival is built on small acts repeated daily, on patience, cooperation, and belief that hardship can be endured. These lessons remain relevant, reminding us that progress is never built without sacrifice. The strength of ordinary people is the foundation of every great change in history. Looking back, the workers' strength appears quiet, but it was powerful. It was not displayed in speeches or celebrated in books, but lived in every step, every meal, every hour of labor endured. The story of their survival is one of determination written in silence. And it is that silence, steady and unbroken, that makes their strength unforgettable. Their endurance echoes softly even now, through time. This strength was not just physical, but emotional and spiritual. It was found in patience, in kindness, in faith, and in hope. It was built in crowded homes, noisy factories, and narrow streets. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary in its persistence. And it carried workers through an age that tested them more than most. Generations that followed benefited from this endurance. The schools, communities, and improvements that came later were built on the sacrifices of workers who endured the hardest years. Their survival laid the groundwork for progress, even if they did not see the results themselves. Their legacy was not wealth or fame, but resilience passed forward. This inheritance of strength shaped the future of entire societies. The Industrial Revolution is remembered for its machines and inventions. Yet beneath that story lies a deeper one, the strength of survival. The workers who lived through hardship proved that history is not only shaped by great discoveries, it is also shaped by ordinary people who endure, who adapt, and who quietly carry the weight of change. Their strength is the true story of the age, and as we close this journey, let us remember them with calm reflection. The men, women, and children whose quiet survival became part of the foundation of modern life. Their struggles, their patience, and their strength deserve to be recalled, not with noise, but with gentle respect. For in their endurance, we find lessons about resilience that still matter today. Their story is one of hardship, but also of unbroken will. Thank you for listening to this history tonight. May the calm of this story guide you gently into rest, carrying with it the quiet strength of those who came before. In the next story, we will journey even further back in time, exploring how did ancient Greeks solve their legal disputes, a glimpse into another world where survival and justice took on very different forms, yet still shaped the course of history.